something. I don't know if you want to turn your camera on when you're asking Bob a question, or Bob, I don't know if you want us to raise hands or interrupt you. How would you like to?
I figure that whatever is easiest. I mean, people want to raise hands, or if they want to interrupt, if I'm not looking and seeing that somebody's raising their hand, or Debbie, maybe you're doing that.
Yeah. So
you know
Bob,
what I mean? I don't have.
I'll control the people raising the hands, and then I'll let them ask the question, so that you can choose and go forward.
Okay, very good.
Okay, thank you all. Enjoy the webinar.
Great. So yeah, just a great introduction, a small introduction to Bob. It's been really nice working through all of your books. I really appreciate it. And the interesting thing, I think I was sharing it with someone in my family, and when they saw it, they pronounced it as Bob Seiner, and then someone else said, I don't know that Seiner was writing books in the data world. So you've been confused with John Seiner, but now we have the Bob Seiner. So nice to see you in person, and that's great. And then I also wanted to just share with you that I'm hoping maybe if Bryn could turn on his camera. Bryn is working closely with Bob, and it may be possible that Bryn is bringing Bob out to work with some of the local customers in South Africa. So if any of you are interested, please contact Bryn, and I'm sure he'll have some questions and answers and comments in the discussion. So let's get back. Bryn, anything quickly that you would like to say about that? I'm hoping that that's all sorted out, and maybe we can see Bob on our shores pretty shortly.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'll pop my email in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, Bob and I have been talking for many years.
Right.
Probably about a decade. And yeah, so we got a formal partnership now that we represent in Bob and Kick, his company, as well as Non-Invasive Data Governance Methodology in South Africa, formally. So really excited. I mean, that's hot off the press. Bob, you can say more. I'm really excited to work with Bob going forward in SA.
I'm as excited as you are. So I look forward to it. Yeah, we've been talking. We've partnered for certain events and stuff in the past, but this is actually the way my business is moving forward, is to develop partnerships with companies like yours, Bryn. And it's going to be an honor and a pleasure to work with you. And so hopefully we can bring non-invasive data governance to a larger way to South Africa.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. Thanks,
Scott. Okay. Thanks, Bryn. Okay, great. So Bob, over to you. I will just manage the chat. I know that our previous speaker actually said it would be really nice to see some of their faces. So for example, when William asked so many questions and Michael is just like, I'm not sure who I'm talking to here. So that may be helpful. Not everyone has to turn their cameras on if you'd like to. Andrew's keeping his on, that's great. But if anyone would like to, if you wouldn't mind just making yourself visible. If you don't want to, that's okay. But I'm sure Bob would like to see who you are and remember the face. All yours, Bob.
Are you seeing my screen right now?
No, I'm seeing you. So if you present now.
So let me back away from this and reshare my screen. Let me move this over here. And I may not be able to see you, but it would be nice if you do turn your cameras on. I think it's good for everybody.
Yeah.
This. Okay, now you are seeing it, right?
Yeah. Now we're seeing it.
Okay, so now where's the presentation? It's over here. Oh, come on. Oh, man. I'm having a hard time finding the PowerPoint. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to move this up here. Let's try this. Now are you seeing my screen?
Yeah, now we see it. Yep. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, very good. And as you can tell, we're going to keep this very informal. It sounds like a great group. I mean, I know several of you in the group. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Howard, and with Dama South Africa. I think we've done a webinar at some
Yes,
point in
we
the
have.
past.
Yes.
And
Yes.
not only, so not, I've added a little bit of animation to my slides, so I hope I don't overdo it. But not only is this the first book launch for Dama South Africa, and you'd think that after having a third book come out that I may have done book launches in the past, but these are relatively new for me too. So I'm just going to share with you what I want to do is in the first 10 or 15 minutes, just kind of walk through what's in the book. And I'm not here to sell you on the book. Sure, it would be great if you got a copy of the book. I'm going to spend less time talking specifically about the non-invasive approach to data governance, and we can certainly spend time. And Howard, I'm guessing some of your questions are going to have to do with the non-invasive approach.
Yes.
But I'm really excited. It's first of all, I want to thank several people. I was going to want to thank obviously you, Howard, and Debbie. Thank Bryn for the partnership, and it's great to have him here in the meeting with us. But I also wanted to thank Steve Oberman, who is my publisher.
Yes.
And from the time that the book was done and the edits were complete to the time that it hit Amazon was literally a couple weeks. I mean, this guy has got his magic working very quickly, and it's really nice to work with Steve. So I just want to acknowledge Steve Oberman at Technics Publications as well. And if any of you are thinking about writing data books, he has literally kind of grabbed the market in a lot of ways with a lot of the more interesting subjects. He was bugging me for years to publish a book on non-invasive data governance before the first book was even published. So again, wanted to acknowledge Steve as well. I'm guessing that most of you have somewhat of an idea who I am. I do put myself out there quite a bit when it comes to data governance. Again, my name is Bob Seiner. The name of my company is KIK Consulting. I heard Bryn, I think, referred to it as Kick Consulting. You can call it either. Just call. That'll be a good thing. KIK, I get the question a lot, is KIK my initials? And I always say, no, my initials are BS, and I didn't want to call myself BS Consulting. KIK stands for Knowledge is King. And when I consult with clients, my true focus is on knowledge transfer to my clients. So KIK, again, is knowledge is king. And just the whole concept of leaving my clients better than I found them and transferring knowledge to them. I always talked about you've heard the expression, if you bring a man a fish, you feed him for a day, you teach a man to fish, and you feed him for a lifetime. Well, one of my earliest business cards had copies of little fish floating around because my goal was to teach people to fish, especially when it comes to data governance and the topic that I love to talk about, which is the non-invasive approach to data governance. The first book on non-invasive data governance was called Non-Invasive Data Governance, The Path of Least Resistance and Greatest Success. And that was published in 2014. It's amazing to me that Steve, my publisher, and I have had people from all over the world come to us and ask to translate the first book. So the first book has been translated into 7 languages, which is really amazing to us. I just recently received the Arabic copy of Non-Invasive Data Governance, the first book. The second book was a compilation of lessons learned and perspective I've gained in the 10 years of implementing, actually the more than 10 years I had been implementing non-invasive data governance. And so since the first book struck once, I felt it was appropriate to call it Non-Invasive Data Governance Strikes Again. And it's basically lessons learned and perspective I gained in the time since the first book came out and since I started using this approach within clients. The third book that was just released within the last couple of weeks is called Non-Invasive Data Governance Unleashed. And it seems to be that these days, many people are focusing on the human element in terms of data governance and getting people and empowering people in the organization to govern both data and AI. So that's the idea of the third book. It's interesting. The books are getting bigger, are getting larger, should I say more pages as they go. But this last book I'm going to share with you some of the content in that book, just again, to give you an idea as to what that book is all about. Again, non-invasive data governance unleashed. I have a partnership with Dataversity in a lot of different ways, and with DAMA in general in a lot of different ways. I have a couple of learning plans available through Dataversity, one that focuses on non-invasive data governance, another that focuses on non-invasive metadata governance, because if you've heard me talk before, I say the metadata is not going to govern itself. It's going to require governance as well, and we might as well stay non-invasive as we govern the metadata within our organization. And then a third learning plan that's available through Dataversity focuses on business glossaries, dictionaries, and catalogs. I think that I'm going to be working on additional learning plans focused on the non-invasive data governance framework, which, as you'll see here in a minute, is part of the second book. And I also then elaborated on it in the third book. KIK Consulting, I've already told you my joke about the name. It's not BS Consulting, it's KIK, and KIK stands for Knowledge is King. One time I got introduced at an event in New York as KKK Consulting, and you never heard the air sucked out of a room as quickly as it happened then. Yeah. But no, knowledge is king. That's truly the focus of my consulting business. And then I always say in my spare time, I'm also faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University here in my hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in their chief data and AI officer program. It's an executive education program, and I'd love to answer questions about that if anybody has any questions about that. So enough about me. I really want to talk about the book, but I did want to give you a little bit of background as to where the concept of non-invasive even came from. So back when I was in the corporate world, I didn't use the term, when I was a corporate employee, I didn't use the term non-invasive, I used the term de facto. So I started with the idea that there's already people in the organization that are defining, producing, and using data as part of their job. And in most organizations, they should be accountable for how they define, produce, and use data. The problem is that accountability is oftentimes very informal. And because it's informal, it's inefficient, and it's ineffective. It wasn't until I left the corporate world and started my own consulting business that I kind of changed it from de facto data stewardship to the concept of being non-invasive in the approach to data governance. In fact, they weren't even using the term data governance when I first read an article by Larry English. If you know Larry English, yeah. He wrote about accountability to the rescue, and this idea of formalizing accountability across the organization. And I said, you know what, that to me sounds like a very non-invasive way to implement data governance. All right, let's talk about the book. So like the first book really describes the approach and the methodology. The second book is more lessons learned. The third book focuses on people and empowering them to govern both data and AI, because you can't have a conversation these days without AI. So I just wanted to share with you, I figure if you're going to do a book launch, you should show the table of contents of the book, because that's going to give you a good idea as to what content is going to be in the book. So here, I just want to point out that there's things that I say a lot, that the data will not govern itself. The metadata will not govern itself. If we're expecting things to get better in our organizations without any effort, the chances are that's not going to happen. So I start out the book that way. I talk about what ROI looks like. I don't want to go through each and every one of the essays, but I refer to them. I've grouped them into 10 chapters. And then, as you can see, becoming woke about your data. Data governance for the unwilling. I don't know if any of your organizations have people who are unwilling, don't think that data governance is necessary. I say a lot, everybody is a data steward. Get over it. You know, if people have a relationship to the data that they're being held formally accountable for, they're a data steward. Let's get over that fact, and let's start at least recognizing the people in the organization who are stewards. That's all in the human element. Then I spend time in a couple of the different chapters talking about AI. So I talk about a comparison of data governance and AI governance. I talk about the risk and promise of AI. And what are some of the risks of AI solutions with data that is not governed? Again, just some examples of what some of the content is within the book. And again, these aren't, in a lot of cases, and Howard, you probably found this by looking through the last two books, the chapters aren't extremely long. You can see here
Yeah.
how many pages they are. They're
Yeah.
digestible. I wrote it in a way that as if I'm speaking to you, and that can help you to make these subjects relatable to people within the organization. I don't know if I fully expect somebody to sit down and read from beginning to end of the book. They may do that, but they may also just look for specific subjects that are kind of driving them nuts right now, and they want to get a little bit more information about. So that's the first page of the table of contents. Here's the second page. Again, making data AI ready, not assigning people to be data stewards. Let's recognize who these people are. And then another one on recognizing your data stewards. One of my pet peeves is that organizations talk about doing data governance. So I wrote an article, I wrote an essay about, don't use that expression. Don't say we're doing data governance. What does that even mean? And I make some suggestions as to how to avoid kind of falling into that bucket. Obviously, there's going to be a set of articles on non-invasive data governance, but I encourage people to go back and look at the earlier books, talk about the future of data governance, and then the last two chapters really focus on leadership. And then I wanted to make the subject very relatable to people. So I talk about the data domains in terms of an analogy, and I use the grocery store. I know that the people consider data governance to be a team sport. Figured that was a kind of a good way to wrap it up. So again, the book it turned out to be over 300 pages. But again, it was written to be very digestible so that you could check out individual chapters. So now what I'm going to do is back up here a second and talk about the chapters. And as you can see, I've touched on a bunch of specific subjects that I think are really pertinent in today's data environment and data community. I start with the foundations, get into the human element, talk about AI and data governance, strategies, stewardship. Stewardship is all about the people, getting the people engaged. So again, just wanted to share with you here kind of quickly what you can expect to see within the book, what types of topics are being addressed. Give you some examples, and I'm not showing any full articles here, but you can see that if you just take a quick peek at the way it's written, the idea is that it's written it's not written in tech speak. It's really literally written in layman's terms so that you can maybe take some messages from it and share these messages in your organization. I know that I'm working with John Ladley right now. You may be familiar with John. We're working on a statement about how a joint statement between himself and myself about how data governance has really become kind of over-engineered, over-complicated, and how it really doesn't need to be that way. No, there's not anything in the book about that, but I think you're going to see that same type of tone throughout a lot of the articles. And so, again, just wanted to share with you what some of the articles look like. Throughout the book, what I've done is when there is something that I feel is really relevant and that it needs to be shared, it needs to be highlighted. Oftentimes I'll just have a quote in the middle of a page. I don't think you saw that on any of those sample pages, but if there's some certain subjects, certain statements that I'd like to leave with you from reading some of these very short chapters, some of them not as short, but at least highlight some of the most critical points from each of the essays within each of the chapters for you. So there's a lot of quotes. And if you look at them, they're kind of representative of what the quotes are throughout the book. Again, I'm not sure if this is what you normally do in a book launch. I guess we're setting new ground here. So maybe in the future, other folks will consider doing, presentations like this if you really like to learn about the book. I was very fortunate, and I've been very fortunate in my career to get to know a lot of really people that I hold in very high regard in the industry. And fortunately, I think there's a lot of them that are on this call here. And you know who you are. I hope you know who you are. but it's also great when you put a book out to be able to reach out to friends who are recognized in the industry and have them say a few words about your book. I don't know if you know Doug Laney. You probably should know Doug Laney's name. He's written a couple really great books on Infonomics, was his first book. Data Juice was his second book. I provided a chapter in the Data Juice book because he was looking for real life stories from organizations, and I shared one with him. The second person, Dave Ulisny, he is the executive director of the program where I am part of at Carnegie Mellon with the chief data and AI officers. Dora Bosias, I think if you're on LinkedIn, you probably recognize her name. Chandra Donaldson just published a book through Steve Oberman in his company called The Data Detective. It's all about children. It's all focused on helping children to understand the data space. And it's a very unique book. And so Chandra is a friend of mine as well. She wrote an endorsement. Bill Inman, I'm sure you all know Bill Inman, Tom Redmond, the data doc. Again, it's really a blessing to me to know that there's other people that are willing to read these books on their own time and provide an endorsement. So again, just wanted to share with you what some people are saying about the book so far. And the reviews that I've heard from people who had copies of the book before I actually received my copies on Tuesday of this week had said that they really thought that it was probably written the best out of the three, and it's really focused on things that are important right now within organizations. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about before I turn it over to you, Howard, and I feel like I'm going on too much here, is just to share with you some key takeaways from the most recent book. And I just want to walk through a handful of those with you and then turn it back to you, Howard, and see if we have any questions or you have questions. So the whole concept of being non-invasive, well, it kind of starts with the core ideal that your organization wouldn't have been around for 5 years or 10 years or 50 years or 100 years if there was a complete lack of governance taking place. There's already people in the organization that have responsibility for defining, producing, and using data. And if we can formalize their accountability, without making it feel as though we're giving them a lot additional work to do, because there's nobody who's sitting around right now waiting for things to be added to their plate. So if you go out and you assign somebody to be a data steward, that's immediately going to feel over and above what they're presently doing. If you recognize them as a data steward because of their relationship to the data, and you help them to manage that relationship better, you're kind of building it into what people already do. And it's going to show benefit to the organization. And you can do it quicker than if you have to go around assigning people into new roles and making it feel like it's something that's brand new to them. So the whole concept of being seamless and kind of building it into what your organization is already doing from a governance perspective, not only from a data perspective, but from an AI perspective. I mean, there's already people in your organization that are thinking about AI, thinking about the data associated with AI. And one of the things that I've written about recently, actually, since the last book, the content from the last book was finalized, was this convergence between unstructured data, the governance of unstructured data and structured data. So AI honestly doesn't really care where it gets its data from. We need to govern structured data and unstructured data. You've probably heard people talk about information governance. Well, the whole idea of governing, records and documents and content and structured data and semi-structured data is it's going to be a lot easier for the organization to accept if you kind of build it into what they're doing. And that's the whole concept, again, of being seamless without disruption. Let's not put up a roadblock and put it in the way. Let's be less invasive. A word I'm using these days is stealth. Let's do data governance in kind of a stealth under the radar where we're not promoting this huge data governance initiative. We're just kind of building it into what people do and saying, okay, well, that's governance. What we're already doing is governance. So again, trying to stay away from disrupting the organization, especially in the federal government now here in the US. They don't have any options. They can't disrupt what is being demanded of them. Another story for another day. Maximize your business value from data governance. A lot of people think about governance as being about compliance alone. Like I said, everybody in the organization potentially has a relationship to the data in some way. And so how they define the data, how they produce the data, how they use the data, they're all about compliance, but we don't need to just focus on compliance. You can focus on quality. You can focus on understanding. You can focus on data sharing and things like that. Compliance is important, but in the book, I make the point that we're not just focusing on compliance. It's really any relationship that people have to data and how that data is being used to advance decision-making, improve efficiency, effectiveness. Again, you need to maximize the business value that comes from data governance. And the third point here is empowering people to steward the data. One of my pet peeves, I talk about this in the first book, another one of my pet peeves, is that I don't use the word assign. I never use the word of assigning stewards. It's always recognize, because the word recognize has a positive connotation that comes with it. If you're being recognized for something, you're being recognized as somebody who uses data that is classified in a way that it can't be shared, or that you're very strict in how it can be shared. Well, at least you're being recognized that you have that responsibility. Now it's the job of the data governance program to help people to steward the data better. So again, this book was talking about empowering the people to govern the data and to govern AI effectively. Just a couple more quick key takeaways from this book. Everybody is talking about AI. I know there was a person at the beginning of this call before everybody joined who talked about how they're focusing a lot on AI and wanted to see how AI related to data and data governance. The truth is that your AI models and what they do for your organizations it's only as good as the data that is behind it. So having trusted data, increasing people's data confidence level. I talk about confidence of the data quite a bit in the webinars that I do through Dataversity. So ensure that your AI initiatives are built on data that are going to make it worthwhile for you to invest in AI the way that your organization is investing in AI. Creating a scalable and sustainable data governance framework. In the second book, now that you've seen it, Howard, you've seen the second book, I introduced the data governance framework. And in the third book, I talk about how we can, kind of leverage that and start filling in the pieces of the data governance framework to help build a long-term kind of sustainable and scalable program within your organization. And my last point, I kind of added it as the sixth point, is that recognize that there's governance already taking place in your organization. Again, the whole concept of being non-invasive is let's not make this threatening. When I published the first book, and I called it The Path of Least Resistance and Greatest Success, is if you start with the premise of you're already governing your data, let's formalize it. Let's build some true accountability into our organization. You got to recognize that that's taking place and that your organizations have been governing since day one. It's just that they haven't been governing very formally. And again, that's really what the concept of non-invasive is all about, is there's other approaches other than this top-down command and control approach, or the second approach I refer to as the traditional approach, which is, if you've seen the American movie Field of Dreams, where the guy builds a baseball field in the middle of a cornfield in Iowa. The one comment in that book is, if you build it, they will come. And you hear that resonating throughout the movie. In a traditional approach to data governance, you build the program and you expect that people are going to gravitate toward it. That doesn't always work very well because people don't always gravitate toward it. So starting with the premise of we're already doing this, how can we do this better? That is really the core concept of being non-invasive to begin with. And my last slide is, again, I just want to thank the people, thank all of you for taking time to hear me ramble on in an informal manner and talk about the new book. I hope this was helpful to you to understand what the book is all about, what I'm all about, what the books are all about. And please reach out to Bryn in South Africa and start conversations, because we would love to help to enable your organizations with the non-invasive approach to governance. I thank Steve, Howard, Deb. Thank all of you. Howard, that's all I have for today on the book.
Excellent.
I'd love
Bob,
to.
thank you very much. We've actually got a few questions before I go to Hans. And I think I'm going to start with Andrew, because he may fall asleep pretty shortly. So I think it's almost 1 o'clock in the morning for him at the moment. So Andrew,
It is.
All yours, sir.
So it's in the chat, Bob. Thank you so much. Always love speaking and hearing from you. Always. Look, this is me after 40 years of battling away at trying to change the world. If we don't have our executive, drinking the messaging and repeating it and amplifying it, we won't achieve the promise that we try and. We're selling a vision for the future, and the executive are the critical, element to success in a lot of ways, as well as the staff, of course. How do you talk about in the book? How do you talk about the the messaging to the executive with the executive, and their role to actually help execute a change to an operating model?
That's a great question, Andrew. Thank you. There is literally one essay in the book that is different from all the other essays in the book, and that is a letter to your executives.
Yeah.
To try to explain to them, and it's signed by fill in your name. Just to be funny. And it's not a lengthy article, but or lengthy essay, but it is focused on some of that messaging to be able to share with your executives. Because first of all, I would guess that most of them don't even think about the idea that there's a non-invasive way, or more of a stealth way, or kind of under the radar way to do data governance. So I think we need to educate them on that data governance is not this big scary monster that's going to require a ton of resources immediately. Yeah, you know what? We're going to need to recognize who the people are in the organization who are using the data and leverage them more effectively. But I think that there are specific messages that you can share with your executives to kind of break through that facade of, oh crap, we got to do data governance. So what is that going to mean? What's that going to cost? How many people is that going to take? It's going to interfere with what we're doing. We've got to get the message to the leadership, because I believe what you said, Andrew, to be 100% correct. That if the senior leadership don't support, sponsor, and understand what the heck it is that we're doing, that we're going to be at risk. And so I think I wrote about that in the first book, in the best practices article or chapter in that book, is that you need to focus on making certain that your senior leadership that they support and sponsor what you're doing. That's really important, because you're going to need funding in some way. But the understanding is even more important. And I think that's what you're getting to, Andrew, is that they truly understand that we're already governing. We're just doing it in a really crappy way. Mm-hmm. And that we can do it better. And it doesn't have to be this huge, expensive endeavor in order to do it. So it's a long answer to your question, but hopefully.
And I think, Bob, the essay that you're talking about is saying data executives pay attention to data governance. And you talk about the pot of gold and how do they support and sponsor and how do they understand the role. So I really enjoyed that essay.
Well, it's good. I don't know if anybody has the guts to actually write a letter to their executive. Maybe they do, but it wasn't really. I guess it was written as a letter. Like I said, it's different from all the other essays in the book. I'm not sure I would take it verbatim and send it to your CEO, But I think that
Right.
you can include some of the core messaging from that in your messages to the CEO.
Look, an earlier version of me, thanks, Bob. An earlier version of me, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, had said the same thing in an executive governance board meeting, and the message was the right message, but the people that were there listening to it weren't the right people. They weren't ready to hear it, and I ended up getting fired anyway out of the program. Right? So I've learned from bitter experience about being strategic with a nuanced conversation with the executive. You've got to be really nuanced,
Right.
and having the right message at the right time, with the right people, with the right moment. Anyway, but thank you. I really appreciate your answer. Thank you.
It is. It is. And so in the first book, I think I wrote about the fact that typically when I do an evaluation or a critical analysis of a client, there's 5 or 6 best practices. Okay. The number one best practice 100% of the time. And I'm not kidding you about this. It's not 98% of the time. 100% of the time is that senior leadership support, sponsor, and understand what the heck it is that we're doing. Because there's 2 criteria I use for best practice. One is it has to be practical and doable within the organization, or we shouldn't define it as a best practice. The second criteria is we will be at risk if we don't achieve the best practice. And if your senior leadership don't support you, or don't sponsor you, or don't understand what the heck it is you're doing, you're going to be at risk from day one.
Thanks. Thanks,
Yep.
Bob.
Thank you.
Rob, I'm just checking to see whether that answered your question, because Rob Jackson asked the same question, similar question, saying, how does the CEO go about ensuring that data governance in his organization is in good shape? So slightly different in terms of the assessment. But Rob, is that similar on the lines to what you're thinking about?
I think it can be, but I think it's actually a different question. And Rob, you can verify if it's a different question or not. But how do they get them to ensure? It's interesting because we were talking about best practices, and the number 2 best practice, I said the number 1 best practice was number 1 100% of the time. The second best practice has to do with there needs to be somebody in the organization or some team that has the responsibility for administering data governance. Okay, so if you're going to go to your CEO to ensure that your data governance in his organization, I'm assuming that's what you mean, that it's in good shape. Well, do you have somebody who has time allocated to this? Are you, as an executive, monitoring the activity of that person or that office? Are you taking the temperature of people within your organization to see if the approach that's being used is something that's amenable to people within the organization? I mean, all of those types of things. So I don't think it's, I don't necessarily think it's the same question. I guess, yes, they do need to support, sponsor, and understand. I guess if you take the understanding to another level, that is the things that I'm talking about. Is there anybody who's responsible for this? Have we defined what's in scope, what the goals are? I mean, all of these things can help to improve a CEO to understand that there's formal governance taking place. Rob, I hope I answered your question. If you have anything, if you follow up, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Yes, I do think it's a different question as well. So thank you for handling that. CEOs are all concerned about risk and value. And is data governance put into both of those boxes in terms, if I don't do it, this is the risk, and if I do it, here is the value?
Well, the risk, I think, is that you've got people making decisions with data and accessing data who might not who, if you don't govern that activity I mean, there is already governance taking place. The question is, how formal is it? So you've probably already got an information security team that is only granting access to people that have a need to know the data, or who at least check the boxes of saying that, yes, they should have access to that data. do those people know the rules associated with how they can share the data with the next person downstream? I mean, so are there ways to be able to evaluate risk? The question is, do you want to formally manage something that is one of the most valuable assets to your organization, or would you rather have it fly by the seat of its pants? And I think most executives would say that we've got to assure that we're going to be risk aversive. The tying it to business value, as part of the Carnegie Mellon program that I'm faculty on, one of the key messages is with AI and with data governance in the role of the CDAIO is it has to be aligned to business value. If you can't demonstrate how having governed data coming out of your AI is better than having ungoverned data come out of your AI, then you should be working on that messaging. Because that same CEO may be saying, you know what, the wave of the future, we're going to be an AI-driven, data-driven organization. Well, shit, that's not that's not going to happen on its own. That's not going to happen on its own. It's only going to take place through an intentional effort. So again, I hope that I didn't skirt around answering your question.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
Great. Last question from the chat. It's from Brian. Brian, there's lots to read there. I wonder if you can just ask the question.
I don't know if it was a question or more of an observation. You know, we've been trying to, because we say data governance in our organization and people's eyes glaze over and executives turn their backs and people think it's a lot more work than they need to be doing. So we've been focusing a lot on the use of data, you know, really on the value of it and where it can produce results for the organization. And by focusing on that, people are using the data more. They're getting more fluent in the data. They're getting more fluent in just data practices. And that's increasing the data quality because as they use it, they're going, wait a minute, is this data right? No. Well, we got to go back and focus on the quality. So it results in some fits and starts. It results in some, you know, tacking of the sailboat as you're going down and the winds are shifting. But it has focused and it has yielded more improvements in maturity around data management. And we're hoping that continues. We're hoping as we increase the use and the quality, we see, you know, kind of a graph there. We're going to increase on that data maturity model. But we are looking at behind the scenes doing all the things that the business doesn't want to talk about, you know, putting in a data catalog, data dictionaries, using Purview to trace the lineage and manage the data in that. But we're doing that behind the scenes and just exposing them to it as it increases their use of it so that they don't have to worry about data governance. They just have to worry about how is this going to improve my daily life at work.
Okay, so that's a great observation because first of all, the word governance, like the word government, is is very scary to people. So I've written articles, and I don't know if I don't think I included it in this book. Maybe I did.
You did.
About using the term data enablement instead of using the term data governance. I love the idea of using data usage because that resonates with people, and obviously you're showing levels of success, but the fact is that we could shy away from using the word, but the concept is still the same. The things that we need to do are still the same. There's still people that are stewarding data that have formal accountability for the data, whether they recognize it or not. So I think there is a chapter in the new book or an essay that talks about how data governance doesn't have to be scary. I think I wrote it around Halloween, so I was thinking about, okay, well let's make something relevant. Data governance is misunderstood. So Brian, what you're not going to like is you're not going to like my definition of data governance. My definition of data governance is that it is the execution and enforcement of authority over the management of data. And that's worded really strongly. And the majority of my clients say it's worded too strongly and decide to use something that's a little bit tempered down. But the truth is, at the end of the day, no matter what approach you take to governance, command and control, or if you build it, they will come, or non-invasive, you need to execute and enforce authority in order to alter people's behavior. So people say there's a kind of a dichotomy there. I'm saying execute and enforce authority, but I'm saying do it in a non-invasive way. Non-invasive is the approach to recognizing the appropriate people and getting them to do the right thing. You don't have to call it data governance. You can call it data usage, data enablement. You can call it data chocolate pudding, as far as I'm concerned, anything that you want. But at the end of the day, the idea is to build consistency into what people already do. And yeah, there may be points where it still feels invasive. But if you're going to get people to change their behavior, sometimes it takes that. I had a director, a gentleman who was, I think, the CIO of the Department of Transportation for one of the great states in our country here in the US, who, when I gave a presentation about non-invasive data governance, he stood up and took over the room. I swear the guy was 6'8" or something. So I just sat down when he started talking. He said, you know what? What Mr. Seiner is talking about in taking a non-invasive approach is the only way it's going to work for us. But at some point, we're going to need the stick. And I knew exactly what he meant by we're going to need to execute and enforce authority. So you can call it data usage, but if there's no incentive for people to change their behavior, the chances are they're not going to change their behavior, or they'll do it for a time. But again, I love your concept of data usage, especially because it's showing results in your organization. So thank you for the question. I appreciate it.
And Bob, I think you also deal with that in terms of choosing the use cases and prioritizing it. So I think the approach is to get some success and see how integrating quality and metadata and things like that into the processes, how it improves the quality of the data, the quality of their work, and then they start seeing the value of what you're going to enforce.
Well, and selecting the appropriate use cases is really important.
Yeah.
I'm talking to a prospective client right now, and they want to do an assessment. And as part of an assessment, I'd love to take it beyond paper and actually start to implement it. Well, that use case is going to be the way to make use of your roles and responsibilities, make use of your communication plan, make use of all the actions. So use cases become really important because you've got to, I always say you don't want to boil the ocean. I mean, you've probably heard that expression many times. Especially in a huge company, you're not going to be able to just flip a switch and have governance come on. You've got to do it incrementally. I've seen organizations follow through with use cases for years. That's how they're operationalizing their program, is through the use of effective use cases.
Right.
So
that make an impact on the business. William, yeah, I see you've been very patient there. Your turn.
Cool. You guys can see me.
Yes, we can.
Bob, this has been really, really helpful. And I would actually like to add another entirely different purpose to your book. And that is how to teach emotional intelligence. Because the words that you are using are the words people say, rather say this. And I'm going, but that's not what it is. Now, me being slightly autistic, a cat is a cat and a dog is a dog, right? And that's it. So this is very insightful for me, and I'm actually looking forward to looking at it from that perspective. But that's it. A couple of things. There's obviously a change management roadmap for when you are going to introduce governance for the first time. And there I totally agree with you. You've got to find something that speaks their language, right? Whatever you're going to call it, whatever you're going to do it. And as you say, it's not going to change what it is. It'll still be a cat, but if everybody's used to calling that thing a camel, fine. We'll call it a camel and we'll explain it later, right? And so I see a comms roadmap being absolutely key to get people back to being able to say, by the way, what I've now taken you through actually aligns to Dharma and all of their terminology. We need to kind of move across to this Dharma terminology over time. And so there's a comms roadmap so that you can speak about best practice. And you can say, we will be implementing Dharma, but this is how I'm going to get you there. We've got to overcome this challenge of the resistance first. And so, yeah.
I've heard people explain it as meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
You know, at their level of understanding. I love your idea of bringing the emotional intelligence into it. I used to have, I don't know if I still have the book on my shelf. I think that was the name of it, Emotional Intelligence. So that maybe in some way that kind of shaped my thinking about this. And you talk about change management. Change management is ultimately, it's going to be a big change for your organization. So if you don't manage the change, you're going to have a harder time at being successful. So I think Brent and I in Info Blueprint, we've talked about the importance of change management and the importance of creating centers of excellence or communities of practice in the organization so people can share their thoughts. But I mean, it is, I had a friend of mine, you may know him, Len Silverson. Len has spoken at a lot of DAMA events. Len said to me something many, many, many years ago, and now that I remind him that he said this, he doesn't even remember saying it to me. But he said, we shouldn't even call it data governance. He said we should call it people governance, because it is really getting people to change and to change people's behavior. So I think I even wrote about that in the second book, maybe, that Len told me that Len had said, call it people governance, because it's really people's behavior that is being changed. And so I think that's really resonated with me. I don't want to take credit for it, but because he was the one who brought that idea to me. But the whole emotional side, the whole change management side, if we don't meet people where they are, if we don't use terminology that is familiar to them, if we can't demonstrate value to them in what they are doing, we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Yeah, you're 100% right. So if we have a look at a roadmap, right, and we look at a CMMI level, initially you're going in at a level 1, some cases 0, right? And then you have to have that kind of language and that speak. By the time you hit level 3, you should have engaged with frameworks and practices and principles, and you should by then have adopted a proper glossary that is industry standard, so that you can bring industry standard people into the business who understand what you're talking about. They don't have to, I mean, if you get a CDMP person, the person doesn't have to come in and try and figure out, oh, actually a cat is a camel. By the time you hit level 3, you should be locked into a standard. Now, when you have the conversation with the CEO, you have to tell the CEO that you're going to take them on a journey, and that you're going to start here. You're not going to disrupt their business, but you're going to carry them through into a space whereby they can see what's going on, and you can actually then be calling your business aligned to, for example, DAMA. And then there's multiple other frameworks that you need to look at. I mean, you think of the NIST AI risk management framework. I don't know if you brought any of that into what you've been doing. My key takeaway.
I was going to say the framework that I use. So I have a very specific definition of what a framework is. So there's a lot of frameworks like the NIST framework and others that are very prescriptive as to the steps that you should take. And they call that a framework. I don't call that a framework. I call a framework, and I even mentioned this in the webinar I did last week with Dataversity, that a framework is more of a container. It's a way of organizing your thoughts. And it's really neat to be customized specifically to your organization. So I share a framework in both of the second and the third book, which is basically has the core components of a data governance program across the top. It has the different levels of the organization down the left-hand side. Now, if you're familiar with John Zachman and the Zachman framework, it's very similar in nature to, I think John actually inspired me to do a data governance framework similar to his framework for enterprise architecture. And so he
Yes.
said, you're going to want to know the who, what, why, where, when, and how of the organization from all the different levels and perspectives in the organization, the executive, strategic, tactical, operational. Now, then I refer to the intersection of those core components and those levels as being bridges. It's a bridge between this component at this specific level.
Yeah.
So the components I talk about are data, roles, processes, communications, metrics, and tools. You could add more. Again, it's a framework. It's meant to be customized. But you also want to know what metrics are you just using the metrics column. What metrics are important at the executive level? What communication?
Yeah, 100% right.
How do we communicate with people at the operational level? So all of those bridges are very key. They need to be filled in specifically to an organization. Now, in the framework, so I'm in the process of digitizing that framework, and I will make that available as soon as that is ready. It gives you an idea of, because maturity does come into play. If you're uninitiated and you need steps to go from uninitiated to initiated in any one of those bridges within the framework, the digital framework will provide, these are some steps that you should take to go from uninitiated to initiated, from initiated to defined, from defined to managed to repeatable to optimal. But it's so a framework to me is more of a container. It's a way to organize your thoughts. So when you talk again about like the NIST framework, and even the CMMI framework and the DCAM framework, it's very prescriptive.
I agree with you. And so they are useful when you're engaging with, for example, the security architects. They're useful when you're engaging with others that are at level 3, level 4, etc. But getting this off the ground, I can't agree more that you've got to engage with people where they are. But if you can tell them where you're going to take them to, you can give them a roadmap and say, by the way, this is what it's going to look like. We'll start here. By this stage, we will have people using the Dharma dictionary terminology, so we can bring CDMPs in who actually just can pick up and run. These are the things that you can then say, this is what I'm going to do. The last thing is you've got to have a 30-second elevator pitch for that CEO. Just a letter is probably never going to reach his desk. But if you can catch him, and I don't mind doing that, I can catch them in the elevator. But if you don't have that really honed down to 30 seconds max as to what it is that you're going to do. And then the last thing is CEOs always think plausible deniability. So if I can somehow not have this problem because I can sidestep it, then I don't have to have it. And so when you engage with those conversations, you need to make clear that he can't sidestep this one. And so for example, well, let me archive as much data as possible, because if it's archived, if it's destroyed, we only keep this data for so long, I'm not going to have to worry about lawsuits over a certain amount of time. These things are messages that they really like, because it just makes their life simpler, right? So anyway, that's me. It's been very insightful.
You and I could do it 90 minutes on our having conversation.
So I have a similar kind of framework which I use in terms of that. It just has a lot more boxes in it.
Sorry, guys. Could we've got a few other questions.
No problem. Go.
Michael.
Let me just add one more thing, and then we'll
sure.
I see Michael has raised his hand a couple of different times, and that is the chapter in the book that was the letter to your executive. It was more meant to be just the subjects of what might you want to include in that 30-minute or 30-second. You don't get 30 minutes.
Yes.
That 30-second.
No, you don't get 30 minutes.
That 30-second elevator speech. It's got to be something that resonates with them. And if you start with the premise of, you know what, we're already governing. We're just not doing it formally. And
Yeah.
because it's not formal, there's risk associated with it. It'll be a lot less threatening to the organization if we formalize what is informal than if we start over again from scratch.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah,
my
that's a
last-
good line. Yeah.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
William, are you a consultant?
I am, yes.
Okay. Hey, Bryn, we should be talking to him.
Well, you can catch me on LinkedIn.
For sure, definitely.
Thank
I know
you,
William.
William. All right,
Yeah.
Michael, thank you for
Cheers.
being patient.
Cool.
Yes, Michael.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah. So I had a hunch, and maybe your experience will confirm this. But when you talk about non-invasive data governance, to some degree, you're really talking about naturally fitting, something that's naturally fitting. For example, if you had a company that was, well, I'm trying to say culture size and industry play a big role. Because if you had like the military, they would probably want to have as invasive as possible something really structured and hierarchical. So therefore, the natural fit for that company would be probably a more invasive form of data governance. But if you had certain types of companies, maybe in regulated industries, where the people themselves are clamoring together for some governance because they see the value immediately, then in that case, the natural way would be the natural way that they would self-organize to some degree, of course with some oversight. But then in these regulated industries, they're so used to being regulated that just like sort of a military or a hierarchical organization, they wouldn't necessarily mind having strict words because they face strict penalties based on their size. But then if you're dealing with something like, I don't know, a startup, an AI startup, for example, they might intuitively, in their day-to-day job, just be handling the data governance without necessarily needing something as intrusive, because they see it, they see it from day one. And so I just thought, from your so this is my expectation, my hunch. But based on your experience, I mean, is there anything to actually, confirm this, or actually provide some counterintuitive examples of how this works in practice?
So I wish I had counterintuitive, because it makes it for a more interesting conversation. But no, I would say everything that you said is intuitive. And in fact, when I'm really not trying to push the book, but the second book, I believe there is a chapter on comparing different approaches to data governance. And there, like I said, there's the top-down command and control, very strict. There's the kind of, if you build it, they will come traditional approach, and the non-invasive approach. There's a lot of organizations that take a hybrid approach. So certain aspects of it are more invasive than other aspects of it. Mm-hmm. So yes, it has to be customized to the organization. I've worked with military organizations that you're exactly right. They need to be more invasive. They want to be more invasive, but they also people don't want to feel as though the responsibilities are being added to them. They love the concept of the fact that we're already doing this, so I don't have to add 20% of my work schedule to things that are data steward stuff. Mm-hmm. Unless it's really appropriate that this is required of me right now. So I think that you're spot on in the fact that you have to tailor your approach to the organization. And in ideally, it's going to, in many organizations, it will be much more of a hybrid approach. In the second book, I think I had a table that basically lists across the top command and control, traditional, non-invasive. Down the left-hand side, it has the 6 components: the data, roles, processes, communications, and so on. And then it basically has where the bridge between the approach and the component is. It has some verbiage in there. So let's take the roles response, the roles component. In a command and control approach, they're going to be assigned. In a traditional approach, they're going to be identified. In a non-invasive approach, they're going to be recognized. So again, you don't have to stick to your guns and say, we're going to be non-invasive throughout. There's going to be aspects of being non-invasive. The problem is that many organizations don't even think about the idea that there is a non-invasive option or alternative. They think about what was asked earlier about it being, it being command and control.
Yeah.
So again, I hope I answered your question.
No, you did. No, thanks. I was hoping for some surprises there. Like, well, actually, the military might have people, as you mentioned, because there's human nature. We don't like to be forced to doing things. There's also human nature. We don't want to do more than we have to do. And also,
there's another aspect of it too. Does the person who is administering your program have the authority to tell anybody to do anything?
True.
So they, in many cases, they do not have that authority. So the trick is, how do we get people to do things that they should be doing without making them feel like this is over and above what they're presently doing?
So it's more like you're doing this.
Right?
Yeah. Because I like the language, as William also said, the emotional, the language you use has an impact. You're telling someone, oh, you're doing this. This is what you could do to make what you're doing even better, as opposed to, oh, you're doing this, so therefore you need to do this on top of it to.
Or did you know that this person over here was doing that same thing and had a method to do that? Now let's connect you two together. So you build that community of practice between the stewards that they can learn from each other. So it really.
Thank you.
Again, I've been talking about non-invasive data governance for a long time here. I'm not just talking about since 10 o'clock my time here, but it's a message. I think it needs to be part of the core messaging to people so that they understand that that it doesn't have to be as scary as people make it out to be. The word governance scares the hell out of people.
It's scary. Yes, true.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. So then there was another question from Majela in terms of saying, introducing data culture into any organization is challenging. How does the book approach that, or basically your comments on dealing with that and introducing data culture?
There's a couple essays in this book, I think, about building culture into data governance and then building governance into culture. I think one chapter falls right after the other chapter. Howard, I can see you're checking in the table.
Yes, I am.
And so I think that's really important because people, let's put it this way. Data for most people is not front of mind, but it is. Okay, so it's not front of mind. They're not thinking about, well, how can we govern or manage the data better in our organization? They're thinking about, shoot, I can't use this report because I can't trust the value of it. They don't then relate that to, well, where did this data come from? And is it accurate? And is it consistent? And all of these types of things. So you've got to build a level of data literacy into the organization. You've got to get people to understand that data, that's why I say everybody is a data steward. Get over it. What would really be beneficial to people is if they recognize themselves as being data stewards. I define data as part of my job. I want to define the data the best darn way that I can. Or I produce data. I'm going to produce that data. I'm not just going to enter in, 010101 as somebody's birthday when we count on that piece of data as being really important. So culture is important. It's inevitable that there is not a data-driven culture within your organization, and I would say that's probably true for most organizations, that's not going to change either without somebody leading the charge. I have a client right now that's using a product called Data Camp. It's a software product. It's kind of a data literacy tool, and I'm not pushing Data Camp by any stretch, but it's a series of ongoing modules that they've created to get people to get interested in data and to understand how it plays a role in their job. So changing the culture has to be a deliberate activity as well. I hope there's some good ideas in the book for doing that, but anybody can feel free to reach out to me anytime if you want to talk about that more.
And I think Christy has quoted on page 38 of your second book, where you talk about creating a culture where data is an asset, will help them achieve their goals and the work quality, and then also and that data governance is the responsibility of all the people, and so that we don't don't feel like they've been forced into doing governance and they've been
They don't have to
sort of
be
singled out.
They don't have to be forced. They're already doing it.
Yeah.
They're already doing it. They're just not doing it very well, or it's causing problems across the organization. I'm very impressed by this group, Howard. By the way, they're pulling out specific page numbers in the books. To me, is very pleasing.
Fantastic. Christy, any further comments from your side? Anything you'd like to add?
I just wanted to apologize. I had put in page 38 of the second book because that's where his table is, where he goes and talks about the command and control. But I have to say that I have been following your book. So I'm now the data governance manager at my organization. I started data governance probably 10 years ago in a very low level way, and then started really getting heavily into it in about three and a half years ago. We have an amazing program at our campus. I've already created a data governance training program, a data catalog training program, and a data literacy program. And because of the way we approached it, and it was, like you said, it's that non-invasive approach, but I also felt that if everybody understood that there's no such thing as ownership, I do not use the word ownership, and I've stricken it from everything because I don't like it. What I say is that data is an asset, and that asset is so important to our institution, not just the institution as a whole, but to every single department. And that, for me to be able to help you achieve these goals, you need data, and that data needs to be consistent. It needs to be trustworthy. It needs to be accurate. It needs to be assessed and managed. And therefore, if we're doing that in our department, then you have that ability to use that to assess your learning goals or outcomes, or your department goals, or your department questions that you have on how you can be successful. And by doing that and creating that culture where everybody feels as though we are all responsible for the data, no matter who we are, whether we're a student, a faculty, or a staff, the president, the vice president, it basically takes away that need to be prescriptive and forceful. And I mean, like the stick, everybody knows there's a stick, right? There's a stick somewhere, but nobody has really seen it or needs to see it because everybody is really passionate about making sure that we have what we need, because they have seen the actual examples of what happens with that data and how other things have transpired into great successes because of that, right? So when they see, it's kind of like, oh, well, there's the evidence. And I always say, data is evidence as long as the data is good. And so for us, we're trying to give you the best data that you can use to do what you need to do, but we also need you to be responsible. You are the subject matter experts. You know the data better than we do. So please help us in that journey. So my tagline is always, we're creating a data-centric culture to inform decision-making. And it's an asset to our institution.
You know what? I love the fact that you're doing it. You're building it into what people do. You're recognizing people. The whole concept of everybody is a data steward is really true. I mean, everybody, I wrote down, data is everybody's problem, or data is everybody's solution. And so, Christy, I really appreciate your sharing that. It takes time, and you're going to need to do this incrementally. So I'm really happy to hear that if I've been any small part of your success, or even sharing ideas with you that you've then taken to higher heights, I'm very appreciative of hearing that from you. So thank you.
And Bob, that's something that you also address, and you renamed the data owner to the data investor.
You're very quick, Howard, in reading through the new book. You're right, because there were people that Christy, I agree with you 100%. I have basically struck the term owner from my language. Usually if I use it, I put the letters sick after it, because I really don't like using it. The owner implies exactly the opposite of what steward means. Owner is, it's mine. I can do with it what I want. Well, that's not true. It's the data is owned by the organization. So calling somebody a data owner, although I suggest not to do it, there's still some organizations that do it. A steward, by definition, if you look in the dictionary, is somebody who takes care of something for somebody else. And if we think about it in terms of everybody in the organization is taking care of the data for the organization, and that sounds, Christy, exactly like how you just described, that's everybody is a data steward. When I said get over it, there were people that responded and said, well, that was kind of rude. Why did you need to say get over it? Because, you know, I gave a presentation on a boat in Europe several years ago where I talked about everybody being a data steward, and somebody raised their hand and I said, okay, you have a comment. They said, well, if everybody is a data steward, then nobody is a data steward. Like if everything's number one priority, nothing's number one priority. And I'm sorry, but I just downright disagree with that. Everybody is a steward is the only way to cover your entire organization. Otherwise, you're going to assign or recognize certain people, or you're going to assign or identify certain people as being data stewards, and they'll be involved. But Christy, the way you sounded like you had done it was, this was really a culture. We're all in this together. And to me, that sounds perfect. So thank you.
Any final comments, Christy?
Oh no, we lost her.
No, I'm here. I'm here. No, thank you. I have to say, I was just posting that, you know, everything I've learned, most of everything I've done and learned from is what you have written, both your books. I've attended almost every one of your webinars on Dataversity for the past 3 years. You know, but I also I'm giving a presentation at HEDW in April on our program and our data literacy program. And I just think that I've seen other governance programs, and I see them using the words ownership and very prescriptive languages in their charters or the way they do things. And there's more of this mandatory aspect to it. And I think we don't have that. We don't have this. We've never had to, I would say, right? So yesterday I asked somebody to be a data steward, and they were looking at me like, okay, so what would I do? And I was explaining, you know, what part of the institution that they would, and I was really waiting for this person to be like, no, I don't have time for this. And they're like, yeah, I think that's great. You know, it was immediate. And I'm just, at first it kind of shocked me, but I do feel it has to happen in a cultural change. I don't think that you can just like walk in and start like dictating. I mean, I worked in corporations for a very long time, and I feel that that kind of environment just doesn't work well. And I was talking to a colleague yesterday who tried data governance in his last organization, and he said it was just total chaos and it didn't work because it was this top-down mandate, but yet the way he explained it was they kind of gave us a car. It was this beautiful sports car, but there was a lock on the steering wheel and a block on the gas pedal. But they were looking out the window going, I don't understand why you're not doing anything. I've given you what you need, right? But that's how they kind of felt. And he felt that our approach was much different because we didn't go top down. We started from within our data management area and went outwards. And so that was, to us, it was extremely successful. And I've seen other institutions that follow that same example.
Well, thank you. You made me feel really good by letting me know that somebody out there is listening to the things that I'm writing about and that I'm saying. I know that there's a lot of people that are. It's very practical. You're taking a very practical approach within your organization, so it's not surprising to me. Yeah, it's always nice to have somebody, you know, have a eureka moment where a light bulb goes off above their head and says, you know what? Yeah, I am a data steward. And yeah, just help me to steward as well as I can. And, you know, when they're asking questions like that, you know, you're going to be successful in your organization. It sounds like you've done a lot of it. So, Howard, I think we're running right up against time. So
Yeah, I think we're there, and maybe just the last word from Bryn before we go. Any final comments?
you're on mute, Bryn. We're not hearing you.
There we go. Is that better? Sorry.
Yeah.
Mike's been playing up a little bit. Yeah, thanks very much. No, just to say, Bob, you and I have had many conversations over the years, and I'm involved in this game and have been for many years with Howard, and everything that's been said here I can absolutely resonate with. Seeing it all, done it all. Your approach is so practical. It really is. But probably one of the biggest takeaways really is language, and I've always said I absolutely hate the term data governance. Makes people run a mile. Rather use the words either data or information in combination with very positive words like resource, asset, product, and enablement. You said it yourself. Any combination of those kind of words typically does excite people a lot more than data governance. So thanks very much, and really looking forward to working with you.
Myself as well. I would just add one thing. If people are interested, connect with me on LinkedIn. I try to write an article a week or something like that. I wrote one recently called Consider Stealth Data Governance. And the reason I wrote that is because I'm working with a federal government organization here in the US. And if they come up with anything brand new, they're not going to get funding for it right now. So it's kind of like doing data governance, but doing it in such a way that it's just, again, kind of built into what people do, and taking that stealth approach. If you know what a stealth bomber is, it avoids being recognized by radar. You're doing it under the radar. So I'd be very curious as to people's thoughts about, can we equate being non-invasive to being stealth? And I think it's something that I'm right now very passionate about, because the federal government here in the US needs a lot of help. That's just putting it.
Great, Bob. And I'd just like to thank everybody. Thanks for the engagement. And the last thing we need to do, Bob, is to maybe identify, well, not maybe, we need to identify an individual that will take the book home. That Steve is so great at sponsoring a book for one of the attendees in terms of